Are you an adventurer looking to take your hunt to the next level? Then you're in the right place. Welcome to East Meets West Hunt with your host, Beau Martonik.
Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the East Meets West Hunt podcast presented by Spartan Forge. On today's episode, I am joined by Forester and Pennsylvania hunter Kenny Kane. So Kenny and myself spent the day shooting videos, explaining different types of timber cuts and how they're beneficial for deer hunters. And then we capped it off with a podcast. So we discussed private lands open to public hunting, hunting leases, restoration forestry, beech trees, favorite browse species for deer, herbicide spraying of logging cuts, how to hunt different ages of cuts, and then we go through some listener questions about top food sources for deer in the big woods, gypsy moths, and much more. I do not have a Mountain Buck Monday story this week, and the reason is, as this episode comes out live, I'm on vacation and I won't be able to post any. The pictures and everything else on social media. So, taking a break from it this week, and there'll probably be a break during September on that as well. Unfortunately, just with me being out elk hunting, I don't know if I can, if I'll have service on any of those days to be able to get that stuff out. But nonetheless, Mountain Buck Monday is not going away. It'll just be intermittent here for the next month or so. But anyways, so as I mentioned here in the intro, Kenny and I spent a whole day out looking at some private timber company pieces of land that he's managed over the last 8 or 10 years and explaining the different types and ages of the cuts, all of this stuff. So that'll be up on YouTube. My plan is to release it right around the time this podcast comes out, within a couple days, depending on how much I'm recording this ahead of time. So depending on how much time I get to finish the editing, it might be a little bit longer, but nonetheless, just head over to my YouTube channel, which is under my name, Beau Martonik, and then you can subscribe, hit that little notification button so you know when the new episodes come out. But this is going to be a really good informational video when that comes out. And then this podcast is separate, kind of breaking down some of the things we've seen, and then also just talking about some things that listeners had questions for Kenny. He's been Kenny I've known for a long time, and since high school or college I think we met. And he's been, since we've kind of reconnected over the last year or so, just such a wealth of knowledge, and I've learned so much about tree species and how deer interact with it, and was a huge help at the Mountain Buck Scouting Camp. People learned a lot from Kenny. So I'm excited to get him back on the podcast. And if you like the videos and these podcasts with Kenny, let me know. I'd love to do more with him, and we have some more plans. So hopefully that works out for you and you like the content. So if you do, as always, please give the video or the podcast, 5-star rating and a review wherever you listen to it. Helps out so much. Share it with your friends. But anyways, I hope everyone has a great rest of your week, and we will see you next week. All right, Kenny Kane, welcome back, brother.
Beau Martonik, great to be back, buddy.
Yeah, I'm excited to get to talk to you. We just spent all day, well, I guess all afternoon.
All afternoon.
That was exaggerating quite a bit, but doing some videos, running around in the woods, checking out, having you explain some stuff, and with logging cuts and everything, but I'll get into that in a minute. But we earned having, we didn't have any big trucks left. You got the shirt on.
I got the shirt on. Still loving this shirt from the scouting camp.
But anybody that is upset that we're drinking White Claw Surf Tropical Pomelo Smash, I'm telling you.
Perfect on a hot day like this.
That's what I'm saying.
Perfect.
I think it said 87 degrees.
Yeah, it was hot.
And I definitely feel that.
Yeah. Yes.
So we're just kind of refreshing a little bit here, and after shooting some videos, and it was cool today. It was cool to get to shoot some videos and kind of explaining from the forestry perspective how deer hunters can relate to it. And I learn a lot whenever I get to go out in the woods with you.
Well, not too many people get to learn a lot with me. but I'm glad I can help someone out.
Yeah. So, and anybody that's listening to this, we were supposed to record this episode actually at the Total Archery Challenge, but
Business was booming. Michael and I were just selling shirts left and right. We didn't have a break to get it done.
yeah.
And there's a lot more important people there than me to do a podcast with. So it was worth it.
No, I wouldn't say that. I think it was like, okay, Kenny, we live close to each other. We can get together at any time. I was like, let's couple it up. Let's use it as an excuse
Yes.
to get out. I mean, this is work for you.
Yes,
So
I'm working.
you're working. I'm working.
Exactly.
So we're both working right now.
I know
and it's, as we're recording this, it's coming into the 4th of July weekend here,
Yes.
end of June. I guess, it still would be this weekend.
Yeah,
wouldn't
it would be.
So we put in a good day.
We did. I mean, things were great. Weather was beautiful. Got to see a lot of different things. Got to see the guys logging. I wish they were, out with the felling machine cutting, because that, who doesn't like big equipment? It's just kind of fun.
Yeah.
But that guy, he's nuts, and he works from like midnight to noon and then leaves.
Really?
Yeah.
Does he work?
He's a night shift guy. He doesn't like dealing with people. He's left alone. And those new Timber Pro fellers, they're lit up with lights. It's like daylight at dark.
Really?
So he can operate, safer because there's not other folks around. He knows he's left alone, and I'm like, hey, I can respect that.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. No, that's cool. And we so kind of the idea of it was to go to a piece of private timber company property that you manage.
Yep.
So you know that land like the back of your hand.
Yes.
And so we could go through, and it's also an area that I've spent time in, that I've hunted and everything else in the past. So like I had like my perspective on like what I saw it as before.
Yep.
Before this is started getting really managed here in the last 3 years.
8 years now.
Has it been 8 years?
8
Okay.
years, yes. And it kind of, on the local standpoint, this property is a fairly, several thousand acre chunk of land, and it's always been open to public hunting. So it's been a big riff as they leased a good chunk of it. Like, hey, these folks bought it for an investment. Taxes are expensive. You got to do something to offset your costs. But anyone that can hunt around here, there's still a lot of public land on the outskirts that share common boundary lines, but the quality of the hunting since they took over ownership has increased exponentially because the quality of the habitat.
Yeah.
So there's pros and cons to everything. So finding the pros in it is the habitat is so much better. The cons of it is not all of it is open to public, but there's a lot of lease members, and realistically, it's fairly affordable to do.
Yeah, and then there's private ground that is all like mixed in with this area that is open to public hunting.
A lot.
And around and like that anywhere as things become leased up, and I don't think that trend's going away.
No, it's not.
And
it's
I
not.
think I mean, taxes are expensive.
Yes.
Like, you can't blame the landowners.
No.
For that. I don't at all. And I think like, even with with me having the podcast and talking a lot about hunting either public ground or even private lands open to hunting, there are places, Pennsylvania, like states like, you get into states like Ohio and some like the really big buck states, leases are pretty expensive. But you can get some affordable ones in Pennsylvania and other ones. You might share them with a lot of other people.
Right.
And it doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be better hunting, but there are opportunities to be able to do that for reasonable prices. Some down as low as a couple $100 up to up to $1,000 basically, probably at the higher level for Pennsylvania. But and that's access to thousands of acres basically. And again, you share it with a lot of people. But it's another point, and depending on how these leases manage it, like they all have their own rules and everything. Some of them add different antler restrictions. Some of them do, different things that can increase the hunting, or they're doing, more timber management and stuff that you can get a little bit better, experiences.
Yeah,
out of it.
you really can. And actually, like, I'm dealing with hunting leases daily, and I say hunting leases, but anymore it's turning into recreational leases. There's, I go through the list of folks that are on the lease for a property I manage, and sometimes you're finding 2/3 of them have it just so they can set up a camper and bring their four-wheeler and side-by-side and have a place to legally ride, and they aren't out here hunting. So it's like, wow, you could be someone that may be on a lease with 30 other people on 1,000 acres, but only 6 or 8 people are hunting.
Yeah.
So it's like, there's a pretty good gig.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I think, and at least from what I've seen in like seeing properties that have become leased up and these things, they have they usually are doing good timber management because they're usually owned by
these timber investment companies where, and they've got a bad rap over the 20 years. I mean, when I was in school at Penn State a decade ago, I got told how bad timber investment companies were. Well, maybe there is some bad ones, but the ones that I work for, they spend more money than any other landowner I've ever seen into, treatments so that they can get successful regeneration, which, that brings the value to the property in the future if they go to sell it, and that's their future asset. But also, they invest into, herbiciding, timber stand improvement, things of that sort, where some may look at it, well, all I want is, they look at them and say, they only look at trees, they only look at logs, they only look at dollars. That's not the case at all. So, and that's one of the risks where I see it. I'm kind of a critic of the big public land push. I'm a private land manager and we talked about this in the last time I was on the podcast, all these private lands that are managed that are open to public hunting. But there's a lot of private lands that are managed phenomenal. We've taken folks from, the U.S. Forest Service, the DCNR, the PA Game Commission, public entities to show them what we're doing on private land to manage because we can access more tools. We don't have the red tape, like what everyone's going to see in the videos that we put together today was this is like new territory of doing this whole tree chipping. Never thought about being done on anywhere. My father and his his former business partner, they hated this whole tree chipping thing, but now it's like, whoa, it's a great tool because it can fix these high graded stands.
So explain a little bit what the tree chipping is and what would you call
restoration forestry. Okay. So is a term that I'll say my father came up with, that the folks in our office came up with, is it's like, well, geez, this is a goofy kind of timber management where it's like, we're trying to restore the forest. We're fixing these high grades where, you hear things of folks talking about cut all the big ones so the little ones can grow. That's not the case.
It makes sense to me.
It makes sense. Cut the big ones so the little ones can grow. But I said this before, is no matter how much we feed you, you're not going to be 6'5". And trees are the same way.
I just turned 30 and I'm working on
it, slow and steady.
I'm pushing it. I just crushed 5'10", so like I'm almost at 6'5".
Right, you're getting there. But trees are a lot like that, and there's just genetically superior trees, and formerly there's a lot of these timber companies that went in and we'd say cut the best and left the rest. Didn't get rid of the undesirables, didn't get rid of the poor form trees, the lower quality, the suppressed. So we're going in doing this whole tree chipping, and we're removing the undesirable species, the poor formed, the ones that aren't going to grow into a log. So our foresters are going out into the field and marking what I'm calling desirable species, cherries, maple, oaks, tulip poplar. I go down the list a mile long. We're marking those trees for, to be harvested. And then we have a prescription written done training with the feller operator where all the beech and the birch and the straight maple are being cut. So, saves time for us because, boys, you saw some of them today. You could, go for hours and not cover an acre because there's so many trees. So he goes in, cuts those undesirable trees, and none of these trees being cut will ever be a log. They will not be a merchantable saw log. So it's just we're getting rid of the junk. And with that, so they cut the tree, the feller buncher, if no one knows what they are. They can get on YouTube and check them out. And this guy sits in I'll call it an excavator on steroids, and cuts and bunches the trees and, creates a pile. The grapple skidder comes in, backs up, grabs them, pulls them to a landing, and there is a whole tree chipper, which it is just a monster.
Yeah, yes, it is.
It takes a whole tree and turns them into, 1 to 2 inch square wood chips. So a tree to a chip. And then they get hauled to the paper mill, and they're turned into paper. So we take a product that had no value on the stump, very, very little value to wildlife, and now it's turned, we have a renewable resource being produced into a product, and then it's giving us the opportunity to regenerate the forest so that we have a healthy forest for the future and create phenomenal wildlife habitat.
Yeah, no, and it makes sense, like, knowing some of these areas that were basically, they had harvested the timber in a not thinking of the future type of way.
Yep.
40 years ago?
Over the last 20 to 40 years ago it started. They owned this for quite some time.
Okay, so but back, and then before some of this cutting took place, so I was familiar with the property, and I'm sure, and this isn't just this, just for this specific property, it can go anywhere, but I'll use this as an example. But you'd go in there and it'd be so thick, the beech brush was ridiculous. Yeah. And I mean, the beech trees were tall. It wasn't just brush when you think of brush, right, but we call it that. And you couldn't see through any of it. You couldn't, and it's just, but there was no browse down lower. Right. So it wasn't great for the deer. You couldn't even hunt it because there was no way you could even sit in there.
You couldn't see, you couldn't sit. The beech is unhealthy. And I'm sure folks have seen it. And up until recently, and I don't know how, why, or what's causing it, but just in the last 3 years, we're seeing beech nuts.
Yeah.
I've been doing this for 10 years now. I've been hunting for 20 years now. I never saw beech nuts. And, so I'm still looking at myself as a young forester, and I go to my dad, who's been doing this for 35 years. I said, Dad, when's the last time you saw beech nuts like this? He goes, when I was your age. Haven't seen beech nuts like this, and there's a lot smarter people out there can tell you how, why, and what's going on.
Okay,
I will refer to them.
Well, and it's made it really good as far as the deer hunting. So one thing that I'll say for anybody, from the deer hunting perspective with the beech nuts is it's created almost like a mass crop, essentially, from the standpoint, especially areas that don't have oaks. Yep. But even so, even in areas with oaks, they might prefer those acorns first. I don't know if that's true, but I believe
actually beech nuts would be taken up first.
Really?
Yes.
Because I was finding beech nuts in late season, the deer were pounding, and I was finding sheds in areas that had beech nuts that they were spending a lot of time in, but it could just been because the beech nut crop was so good, right, that it was everywhere. It's almost like when you get an oak forest that's primarily oak across the board, that you have a really bumper acorn year, you can't focus on anything because it's everywhere. But in the past, and I always refer to this story, at least recently, since last year, that the buck that I had shot, I was sitting, actually I don't even know if I talked about this much, but I was sitting in this hemlock stand in this creek bottom, but there was one beech tree there that was pretty big, and it was dropping beech nuts, and the deer were feeding on that, almost as they'd feed in that newer logging cut at night and then come out, hit that before they go back to bed. Get that last little thing just to get them through the rest of the day. And that was kind of a focal point for me. So beech nuts. And one thing my dad pointed out when I was in the woods with him not that long ago is the smaller beech trees that are getting beech nuts too. Yeah. And how and why they never did this. And we're seeing some other things, which I could go down a rabbit hole talking about beech, as we're seeing this, they're calling it beech browns. So you could be, folks, just pay attention as you're out driving and you're like, wow, why does the understory, the leaves are shriveling up? It's looking like wintertime out there in a beech stand. And the suppressed beech are starting to kind of choke off. And why, I don't know. It could be a change, something with the soil, nutrient composition. Beech is, in the 80s, there's the beech scale nectar complex, which is that white pubescence you'd see on the beech trees, causing them to snap off.
it just kills the trees. Where now maybe they're becoming resistant to it, so we're finding some healthier trees that withstood the beech scale, and so maybe we're getting some genetically stronger beech trees. That's just my theory. I wouldn't trust any of it, but it's something that, and there's research being done on the folks that are much smarter than I. I get to notice it on the landscape.
Which is 96% of the population.
97.
Okay.
Yes. So, but that's something that we're seeing on the ground that we can report back to our cooperative partners that we do a lot of work with the the Forest Service lab, the folks at the DCNR, the Game Commission, and everyone's looking into this as the how and why. But pretty good problem that we're having with it.
Yeah. No.
This is new.
No, and while we're on the topic of beech trees, before we transition a little bit, is beech trees they can be a nuisance in a lot of areas, but I will say that I tend to find the majority of primary scrapes either under a beech tree or hemlocks, and this is Pennsylvania. There's other, and my reason for that is that they keep their leaves on it. So even in the wintertime, when that branch is broken off and it's sticking down as being the licking branch, that those deer can see that from a ways away, and it's just like that visual thing, and it holds scent on there because it's holding the leaves and it's holding that stuff versus any other type of tree that loses their leaves earlier.
This will kind of take me back to the scouting camp. I'm like, that spot I hunted last year, the big scrape I found last year, beech, hemlock, beech, hemlock. I'm like, oh, now that makes sense. So you just taught me something, take me back to the scouting camp is when we were walking and you and your dad were like, oh, look at this trail and pointing out rubs and scrapes. And I said, well, yeah, no shit, guys, because this is the first food source we come across, and we walk around the ridge and there's a beautiful oak stand.
Yeah.
So it's like, I'm learning just as much.
Yeah, no, that was good, and we talked about it when I did that podcast with Ryan. We were talking about when we walked through the woods with you, and Ryan and I are rut scouting, and then you have your tree mind on it, and you were teaching us all these things. Like we're like, oh, this is great, and we're like, and this is a good spot because of this, and you're like, well, yeah, this is the first white oak that we see. I'm like, oh, all right,
Yep.
I didn't even notice it. It was like 15 yards.
Right, and then the stuff that you guys were pointing out, I'm like, never would have thought of it.
Yeah.
Okay, that makes sense as to why I saw that. So like, I think, I can't speak for everyone, but just like in the BS and that me, Bill, Johnny, Greg, that your dad, that we all had, we all learned as much or more than what everyone that attended the class, or attended the camp. I picked up more, like we're all feeding off each other. Whereas like that was a blast.
Yeah, no, it definitely was, and I've been getting a lot of questions on next one and stuff. It won't be this year, but next year we'll have another one. If it fills up as quick as it did this year, then probably have two of them. And Kenny already said he's going to be there again.
I'll be there in a heartbeat.
All right,
I wouldn't miss it. Sign me up.
All right, no, I think that was a really cool thing,
and I'll say too, and all the guys that were there, as participants in the class, there isn't like one person that I wouldn't go hunting with or invite to my camp. There's just a lot. Everyone was a good person.
Yeah.
Did not meet a person who's like, Shay, like, no, everyone was just good people.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I learned so much from the students that were in there, and like it was just a really good event. So to go back to like what we were talking about, and we're looking at, the types of cuts we're looking at today, but let's start, from at the beginning on, from a deer perspective, the cuts that they cut, in the last 48 hours to say even 6 months. What kind of value do you see from a deer hunting perspective in that?
I mean, so we'll start with like the most recent, and here we sit on June 30th. The tops and everything, the recent harvest stuff, not doing much. The turnaround and with the whole tree chipping, it's not going to give that value. Getting rid of that stuff, turn it into a product is the main reasoning of, that harvest. But now if it was November, December, January, February, those are the spots to be. Right after he's gone through and those tops are hitting trees are hitting the ground, those tops are there. you want to be hunting those areas.
Yeah.
You know, some of the best. Like, hey, it's literally, if you're hunting a stand that, like, geez, they have a timber sale marked and they're starting to harvest it, things could change, may not be the best. Like, it's going to change their patterns, like if you're trying to early season archery hunt it. But if you're, you know, get off of work at 2 o'clock and you can get to the woods for gun season in the afternoon, a recent harvest when those guys are going home from cutting timber all day, one of the best places to be.
Yeah.
For sure.
That was one of the things I talked about in the video, and I'll try to line it up so this video goes live about the time this podcast does on my YouTube channel. But I talked about was one time, it was rifle season, I still had a tag in my pocket, and I was driving down this road, and I saw this logging cut that loggers were in it actively, and just so happened to catch one of the loggers out of their truck. They were just about done for the day. I was like, hey, you seeing any deer? And he was like, yeah. He's like, we're not even done cutting, and
Right.
they're coming out and feeding it. And he goes, there's some nice bucks. And I ended up finding a buck right from the road in the middle of the afternoon that was out there feeding on some of those fresh tops that was coming down. And that's a really good time to focus on those newer cuts, is that late season.
Yeah, late season, snow on the ground, that's the best time to be in those recent cuts. And then, you know, we've seen cuts that were 1 year old. Not the best.
No.
And now, especially and I have to say, 1 year old cuts of the video that you'll see from today.
Yeah.
Because with this whole tree chipping, now if it was a traditional harvest, you know, I would be in there immediately 1 year after as well. Like if it was what I'll call a clear cut, where there's the deer browse, you know, it's brushy, it's thick, I would be in there immediately hunting it.
Yeah.
You know.
And as we talked about, like, when we talk about, okay, hunting it, you know, what does that mean? And, like, for me, with those newer cuts, because it is still pretty open, you know, within it, I'm not hunting in the center of it. I'm sticking more to the edges. I'm looking for those inside corners, which basically what that means is, like, where like the big timber that meets up against it kind of has like a point, either, you know, jetting out into it or the cut jetting into the big timber. One of those spots that kind of like is a little bit of like a natural funnel for the deer to enter it, and in those types of places I'm
something
focusing on.
You know, where they're bedding on a hillside that was, you know, cut 30 years ago. It's their thick, nasty bedding area. Well, yeah, I'm not going to be sitting right where we are in a tree stand. I'm finding those, you know, those edges, and that's where it's going to be.
Yeah, definitely. And then as it started getting older, we started finding, you know, we literally walked 100 yards, and then we were in a 3-year-old cut.
Yep.
And now that's getting a little bit better with the blackberry briars growing up.
Yep, blackberry briars, the regeneration, what we'll call that early successional forest, because it's, you know, waist high and under, so it's at that perfect deer browse. You know, that's where they're going to feed, especially up here. Is I don't know how many miles away the nearest true agriculture area is.
Yeah.
So like that's what they're feeding on, is those browse, like those, you know, so 3 year to 8-year-old cuts. That's the places that I like to hone in myself.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Yeah. That's what gets me all fired up.
Yeah.
And like the 3-year-old cuts, and it depends on your area, and I'm assuming the soil types and stuff, how fast they grow.
Yeah.
And like
species composition, you can break it down to topography, slope, aspect, you know, what's growing where, whether, you know, you're in like a cherry maple stand, you know, we'll call Allegheny hardwoods, or are you in a oak stand? You know, do you have a mix of tulip, poplar, white ash? You know, what's there to browse on is one of the biggest things.
And what are some of the trees that are, you know, favorable for the deer to browse on as they're growing up?
So white ash is one of the favorite, which, you know, ash we're kind of in a mix up on, is like, hey, is this regeneration that we want to have growing because of the emerald ash borer? You know, we're hoping that, you know, the borer will eat itself out of house and home, and this next, you know, forest ash that's coming in will maybe be safe from it. But ash is a big one. Tulip, poplar, I'll say hard maple, which sugar maple, same thing. Red maple, soft maple, that's a big one. Red oak, white oak, cucumber, basswood, you know, all these different species are really desirable by deer. But black birch is not, yellow birch is not on the top of their list. Black cherry is not on the top of their list at all. And then another, I guess I should add in another one that's desirable, and it's not a desirable timber species, is fire cherry or pin cherry. The deer will mow that over, but they won't touch a black cherry.
That's crazy. And you were talking about in the videos, like, where some people will see, like, these older cuts that have just, like, filled up a black cherry, and they're like, oh, the loggers, they just, they just wanted to leave those, and that's the only reason. And it's like, no, it's because the deer didn't browse those.
Exactly.
They didn't kill those trees.
Yes.
That's why those grew up.
All the biodiversity, in that stand was taken out because the deer herd was too high through the 70s, 80s, 90s, early 2000s. And then I will say, in 2002, when the infamous it's brown, it's down season started, when buck and doe season were concurrent for the first year, which that's when I turned 12 years old. So it was great for a 12-year-old kid, but since 2002, there was a lot of controversy of, these timber companies just want to kill all the deer, and these foresters are trying to ruin everything. But here we are 20 years later. You think you would have killed the buck that you killed last year, your dad over the, especially your dad over the last, he probably would have. No way. Kill that caliber of a buck.
Yeah.
So it's really paid off, but it's taken a decade. Now, over the last decade, everyone's really appreciated what has happened with the deer herd. We have a healthier deer herd. We're shooting big bucks. So it's really paid off.
That's why your company's called Generations
Forestry. Managing the forest for generations to come.
Yeah, it's not an overnight success type of thing whatsoever.
And just like managing a forest, it's not, hey, okay, here's the species composition and the overstory. Go in and do what we call a shelter wood, get rid of the junk, get some sunlight on the ground, and boom, you're going to regenerate. No, not at all. I mean, you have to reach in the tool belt. You may have to be doing herbicide application, and that's one of the big ones. You're going to have to do different types of site prep. You're going to get invasive species, which are coming more and more and more from, Japanese stiltgrass, Japanese knotweed, barberry, buckthorn. Buckthorn is bad, and that is. I know, I have some friends in the industry that have properties with buckthorn on them, and I feel so bad because you could herbicide it and it be wiped out. But it's such a prolific seeder, the birds eat them, and they come in, drop the seed. They eat the berry, drop the seed, and it takes off like wildfire again. It is in this Forest Health Collaborative, which is the entire forest products industry, from the Forest Service to the state to the Game Commission to the private enterprise like our company at Generations Forestry, to these investment companies, to sawmill companies that are working at developing a plan, because it's just spreading and spreading and spreading. So it's like, okay, here's a map. Let's start and work our way in and keep it contained. But it's a huge, huge endeavor. The landscape's big up here.
Yeah, no, that's for sure. And one thing that you talked about there, I want you to hit on a little bit more, is herbicide.
Mm-hmm.
So herbicide spraying. So if you go into an area that, say, had been cut, probably 3-4 years beforehand, and then you start seeing this undergrowth come up, and then all of a sudden it's dead. And
it's
there's
dead.
Nothing
You're like,
there.
Oh my God, what happened? Well, so the two cookie cutter approaches have been is like, okay, we're going to harvest this stand, so let's go in and herbicide it, wipe out all the the understory, which is 99% undesirable species in the understory, wipe it out, get the good seed crop on the ground, do the harvest, get sunlight on the ground, and we're going to get regeneration. Well, now we're switching things up where we're doing that timber harvest first, because let the seed bank flourish again of those undesirables, then come in 1, 2, 3, 4 years later, herbicide it, because those undesirables are much better at taking off, and they get that jump on the desirable species. So in those shelterwood harvests, we're removing all the undesirables. So we're getting rid of the seed bank of the black birch, getting rid of the unhealthy beech, other things that are coming in, honeysuckle, fern, grasses. We're not trying to create a football field in our forest, we want to regenerate the next forest. Those grasses are not good to have in your forest. So that herbicide takes place, and it's a big to-do now. Glyphosate's ruining the world. It's killing everyone. But we use 2 quarts to the acre. Like, that's nothing. You look at agriculture. I can't say what they use, but they use a lot more than us.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a necessary, I guess, to keep it with the political correctness, it's a necessary evil. But if we had to manage the forest without herbicide, regenerating a forest would be impossible. We wouldn't have the renewable resource. We wouldn't have a sustainable forest without herbiciding.
Yeah. No, and yeah, so that's just, if it's more of a, if you're in the woods and you notice that in one of your like shelter wood cuts, and you notice that.
Yes, you notice that. Don't think the world's coming to an end. Open up your Spartan Forge, drop a pin, and say, all right, I'm going to come back here next year. And then, okay, well, they just cut it. And then keep that in your bank, because that's your future hunting spots.
Yep.
You see those herbicide blocks, like, yeah, you aren't going to hunt it this year or next year, but after they harvest it, primo.
Yeah, definitely. And the one other thing I want to say about like that 3 to 8 year old cut range, or more, is the big trees that they leave in it, and like some of the shelter woods before they end up coming through and harvesting that big timber, is if you have black cherry, if you have oaks in there, like those are good mass trees.
Yes.
And you could, like, we were talking about black cherries not being desirable from the standpoint of browse, but once that starts dropping black cherries, deer love those.
Deer love them.
Scoop them up.
Yep.
They're normally, I don't find them on the ground after the first week archery.
I mean,
sometimes they're gone before that.
Yeah, because the turkey, the grouse, the bear, they'll get to them first.
Yep.
Yes.
Yeah, so that's something else to kind of pay attention on that. And like, where we're sitting at currently is in the middle of an 8-year-old cut. And those ones are like just phenomenal for bedding and cover.
Great.
It's like the stuff is so thick you can't walk through.
Yeah, it's a joy to get to go walk out into those. Yeah. Come up bleeding, covered, and brush, briars. You can be working. You and me could be 10 yards apart, couldn't see each other.
Yeah.
So those deer feel safe there.
Yep.
And in those cuts, it's still. Some pockets, it's way past the browse line. It could be 15 feet high, but you step over 50 feet, and then, hey, it's in the browse line. So it's a phenomenal place to hunt. Yeah,
you're just getting to that, at that 8-year-old range. Again, depending on where you're at, but you're getting to that point where it's still good browse. It's got the bedding. It's got everything a deer needs in one location, and it will hold deer. There'll be healthy deer. There'll be bigger deer. And I think another point on that we talked about in the videos was, okay, so finding these areas that have all that diversity and ages of cuts. We were in a spot that had fresh logging going on, so it's within the last minutes, that was going on. And then you moved over a little bit and you had something that was 1 year old, then you had something that was 3 years old, then you have something that's 8 years old. Now, like, those are the areas when I'm looking at Spartan Forge and I'm going down through my mapping and I'm trying to figure out areas that have all of these different cuts and this different vegetation diversity I talk about a lot. Those are the areas that are going to have the healthiest deer. They have cover to hide from during gun season, and they're going to grow usually bigger antlers.
Yeah, and I'll say too, like back with the Spartan Forge and then the our scouting camp, Bill was showing me some of their aerial imagery, and I'm like, I work for billion-dollar timber companies that do not have this good a aerial imagery. So I'm like, I'm gonna I have his app. I'm like, okay, when that update comes, I can do more than I can sitting behind my computer with the millions of dollars of access to timber companies, and they don't have that. So
hell, you'll be grading trees from the computer screen.
Exactly. I'm coming darn close with what you can do. He goes, yeah, I can, you can measure your tree stand height. And I said, shit, I can measure log heights. That's what I'm looking at.
Yeah.
I can use this for work more than hunting. Like, my God.
Oh, no, it's funny. But so when you get to cuts of this age, like the way I'm looking at it is, okay, still, like, I'll walk the edges of them depending on how big they are when I'm scouting and trying to find big sign on the edges that make me think like a big deer is living in here. And then that's when I'll start, dropping cameras on some big scrapes and then getting on the interior. But I'm not busting brush through this stuff because you can't even walk through it.
Right.
So following those logging trails in, find log landings on the inside of them where they could be bedded around, where they got that visual, but they still got the thick stuff behind them. They can tuck back in at any time. Like, those are my absolute favorite cuts.
For sure. For sure. I mean, I'm a big skid trail proponent. Like, that's where I like to hunt. And deer like us, they're going to travel those skid trail corridors just like you and I, because we're not wading out through the middle of that stuff.
No. And when you find a spot that does this, if you're watching the video, the X where the skid trails meet there,
yes,
man, sit there during the rut for 3-4 days, you're gonna get
it's
something.
It's gonna be on.
Yeah,
it's gonna be on.
Yeah,
for sure.
does are bedding in there. The bucks are using it. Like they got bedding cover, they got food, they got all that, which can be frustrating because it's difficult. You don't see many deer in those types of areas. But if you're patient, they can really, really pan out.
Yeah, it will definitely pay off.
Yeah, definitely. And is there anything like, okay, as cuts, we didn't really look at that today when we were out here doing videos, but as cuts get older and you start getting, above that 10-year-old range, what are you seeing from species, browse, all those different things?
So, looking at it through the forester's eye at first, when you're looking at those 10, 15, 20-year-old cuts. So, I guess I'll say from once they get the size of your thumb and 15 to 20 feet high to the size of your wrist, that's when things will start changing. It's going to shift maybe where you can see through it 50, 60 yards. Okay, it may not be the bedding area, but hey, that's going to be their travel corridor. That's what I've seen just in my hunting aspect. I'm like, I hunted this stand 10 years ago when it was a clear cut. Well, now it's like I'm coming back to it because now we cut some timber over here. This is where they're feeding, but where are they bedding? Well, they're bedding over here on the backside of this ridge. So now that, the pole stand, the small pole stand is now their travel corridor. Yeah. And you start seeing, and that's where the success, our desirable trees really start to shine, where you start seeing the fire cherry is falling out of the stand. It's a very early lived tree, 20 years old, starts falling out, and then it's creating those holes of the somewhat suppressed maybe maple or cherry that was fighting with it, hanging on. And that's where I'm like, okay, this is where I can tell if this stand is going to be a success and, what the true species composition will be for the future. Then it kind of sits in like a odd stage, and then it'll get to a small pole stand, and, the canopy, it's still tight. But if you see these, cherry monocultures that we talked about that were created from the 80s, they're in that 30, 40-year-old age range. Well, now because their tops aren't super, super thick, start hunting those again, because now you're getting some early successional habitat, some, maybe some maple, some more cherry in the understory, and you're going to get some rubus and blackberry briars, and you're going to have another set of browse 40 years later. And in those, in particular, the cherry stands, because their tops are a little bit thinner than like a, if you get into an oak stand with those big leaves, it's like it's open until they start, getting into the mature state.
Yeah. And I have found with some of those older cuts too that some big bucks like to bed in those because it's still thick enough, they have that cover, but they also have the visual underneath. They can lay there and see, they can see 80 yards out in front of them sometimes underneath, but it still creates that cover.
Right, and that's the exact stand that I took my buck out of this year.
Really?
It was in one of those 40-year-old cherry stands. It felt safe. I'm not saying I outsmarted it. I had some good luck. Where I'm like, it more surprised me than I knew what I was doing. No.
Oh, just tell everybody you know exactly what.
Well, I knew exactly what I was doing. I was in that 40-year-old stand. He was going to be bedding, watching me walk across the bottom of the hill, and here I come up behind him. But, that's the stand.
You sneak attacked him.
Sneak attack him.
Wow.
Yes.
That's impressive.
I can't do that very often.
Yeah, that was an awesome buck too. And so Kenny is, as if you listen to the podcast before I did with him, he's not just a forester, he's a hunter too. So he's got both minds.
Both mindsets. So I am out there trying to, and that's one of my things is I always say that foresters, we get into this job to be introverts. If anyone has met me, I'm probably far from an introvert.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know who could talk more at the booth, me or Michael. It was a toss-up.
It was a competition.
Yeah, Mason pointed that out to me and Michael. We give each other a run, so no one gets to talk much when we're around.
No.
But that's all right.
No, it helped me. I was able to do podcasts, and
right,
you guys
and
were able to talk to everybody.
Yeah, we were just selling, and everything was a 5-finger discount, and it worked out great.
Yeah, their whole motto was high in sales, low in revenue.
Exactly, and we succeeded.
Yeah, I should have paid attention to that.
So more. Back to me being a hunter and a forester is like bridging that gap, because a lot of foresters are introverted type people, and it's hard to explain our profession because it's not an exact science. But opportunities like this, because hunters care. But you always, traditionally you've got the criticisms, those doggone loggers just ruined my hunting spot. Well, no, we made it better. You can't have good wildlife habitat without good forest management.
Yeah.
They're going down the same path. And now folks with the Rough Grouse Society, the Audubon Society, they're doing a lot of promotion. Dr. Jeff Larkin from IUP, who's a bird biologist, one of the best bird biologists out there, and is, really jumped on the forestry wagon because he knows how important forest management is to get, good wildlife management, good bird habitat. So it's like, hey, us foresters got to get out there and promote what we're doing. And, it's not just benefiting the deer hunters that are probably, listening to us right now, but the people that go out birding. It's like, hey, you're going to see a heck of a lot more where you're having those different age structures and different habitat and, early successional habitat, mature forests. We want a good age structure, and you're going to see the most wildlife. Plain and simple. Plain and simple.
That's 100%, and that's a good point you bring that up, because I feel like outside, I feel like hunters know logging is good at this point. At least I think they should.
Yeah, they should.
And if not, but I feel like it's the outside of it that don't understand it, because it looks shitty. You look across, it doesn't look good.
Looks tough,
but it's so good for that for the wildlife.
Yes, and if everyone watches the videos that we made today, when it looks like a park and it's beautiful and you can see 200-300 yards, I'm just like, oh my God, this looks like shit. But when you get to the stuff where you can't see 5 feet behind me and I'm pointing out different species of trees that are regenerating, I'm like, this is a success.
Yep.
But it's that
Yeah, you were getting pumped up.
I was getting excited. I'm like, I found some oak in a cherry stand. Yes, this is awesome.
No, that's so cool. Well, let's jump into some questions that we got on Instagram. This was, like I said, the questions were asked a month ago, even as of recording.
Right. I had to prepare that much for him because I didn't know the
Actually,
answers.
I never told you any of the questions, so it'll be.
True. I don't have an excuse now.
All right, so one of the things. So this one's funny. It's just kind of a joke to start it, but Eli, you met him. I met in Montana. Man. Eli says he's only got one question. Does Kenny know how trees get online? They just log in. Oh gosh.
That's the best. I'm stealing that one. I am taking that.
All right. Best way to boost my woods for the deer right after timber harvest. Plant trees?
Here I'll say in northern hardwoods in the big woods of Pennsylvania, planting trees has a time and a place. But if you're say you own a 100-acre piece and it is 100 acres of forest land, planting trees it's either a labor of love, but it's pretty tough. What you really need to do is start at the bottom and look up. What are you seeing? Are you seeing interference from grass, from fern? Do you have any invasives? What's it look like in the mid canopy? If you just did a timber harvest, did you get out predominantly I'll keep picking on beech and birch, even though we've just been talking about we're seeing an increase in quality of beech. Striped maple, other species. Do you have interference in that mid canopy where at times you need to get rid of that, to get more sunlight on the ground, to get that regeneration, so the biggest, and then look at the overstory. How was it cut? Was it, marked by a professional forester? Was it high graded? What's your species mix? Or is the species that's in the overstory, are they shade tolerant or are they shade intolerant? If you're in maybe up into New York where you have some more hard maple, where it's a shade tolerant species, very slow growing, you can get away with more of that interference in a closed canopy. But if you're in a traditional Allegheny hardwoods, a cherry stand, you need more sunlight hitting the ground. You're dealing with shade intolerant species. They need that sunlight getting to them so they can grow. So that's the best, is start at the bottom, look up what's the interference, what's your species composition, and kind of start going from there.
Okay. All right. So actually, I'm going to go through a couple more kind of joke ones first.
I prefer that.
We'll split those up. So Clint Casper's, I can't even read because it's so bad. So we're gonna sorry Clint, we're gonna defer your question here. One that comes from Eliza. If a tree falls in the woods and there's no one to hear it, does it make a noise?
It does.
Does it?
It does.
Okay.
I was there one time when it fell and it made a noise.
But if there's no one there to hear it, does it make the noise? You were there.
I was there, so I guess that doesn't count.
I think it does.
I think it does.
Yeah.
I think it makes a noise.
It definitely does, Eliza.
Definitely does.
All right. What type of tree is most ideal for hanging a set, like hanging a stand, and does this harm the tree itself?
It depends. Most cases, if you're doing it the right way, whether you got your, big game, hang on, or your 2-man ladder, or your summit climber, or your tethered saddle, no, it's not doing anything. That bark is a protective layer. You'll see, you got your climber and you're chewing into it and you're ripping it up. No, it's not going to harm it to any extent. But if you're taking your screw-in steps and you're putting steps in every, 2-3 feet, that's causing some harm to trees. You can find the right tree, and I'm a culprit. I hang my sets in most situations where it's an unharvestable tree, because you don't want to be in a gun barrel 24-inch black cherry. Most stands can't get around them. Then you have no cover. You're just sitting there, sticking out like a sore thumb. But yeah, putting, bow hangers and screwing in steps and nails and things of that sort, yes, it absolutely harms the tree. Like if you screw in your bow hanger, whatever, the inch or so it goes in, you hang it up, you take it out when you leave. Is it going to kill the tree? No. It creates an infection court, which eventually it could turn into something. If it's a veneer quality black cherry, white oak, red oak, it could create a defect in the tree. It could go from a log that's worth thousands of dollars to a log that's worth $100. But most situations, no, if you take them out. Now, if you leave them in there and it gets through the metal detector at the sawmill, now you're talking thousands of dollars, because it just blew up a head saw.
Yeah.
So that's one of my biggest things. If you use, don't use screw-in steps.
Yeah.
The bow hangers, we all do it. I do it. Not the biggest thing. Take them out with you. Take your stand down at the end of the year. Do those things. But, is a cherry better than a maple versus an oak versus a hemlock? Well, it depends where you're at.
Yeah.
What kind of cover do you have? What kind of species composition you got? So, to say what tree's better, whatever one's going to kill you, that deer.
Yeah. and the one thing I'll add about like the bow hanger thing, for anyone that's hunting public land, not allowed to put the bow hangers in, they do make straps that you can go around. And
always keep one of those in my pack.
Yeah.
Always.
For those situations. And even if you're on your own property or one that doesn't have rules around that, that can be a beneficial tool to be able to use. I mean, well, hunting out of a saddle, it's easy to use them. It's a little bit.
It is difficult if you're in your traditional hang-on or ladder or whatever, and you got to stand up, you got to turn around, and everything's close to the tree. In your saddle, you're looking at it, and your binos are here, your pack's here, your bow's there.
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, definitely. All right, another question, kind of burning through these. Hinge cutting. Got probably about 4 or 5 questions. Hinge cutting. Are they beneficial? Is it
time and a place?
Okay.
There's a time and a place. Me personally, if I'm up here, and say you own 100 acres in amongst the, state, you own a piece that's adjacent to state forest. There's not a field or ag site within miles. It's stupid in my eyes, but that is my forester eyes, because the species that I would like to hinge cut, I'm going to focus on beech, birch, straight maple. I want those out of there. I don't want them producing seed. And let's face it, if you're up in the mountains of Pennsylvania, you go a mile or two, you're going to see a timber harvest that was done. That's creating that cover. That's creating that natural cover. Now, say you're in South Central PA, you're in the Lancaster Valley, somewhere that's more agriculture, even, the State College neck of the woods down in that corridor, or you're in Ohio, the Midwest, where it's like, hey, you're within like a 50-acre woodlot amongst the 500 acres of field. That's changing. That changes my mindset, because, you need to create that bedding, but you need to pick and choose what species. You could be in an oak stand and, have oak, hickory, tulip poplar. And I've seen people, I have a friend that's a client, and he, maybe he'll listen to this and he might pick up
Jeremiah?
Yeah.
Yeah. He has a question on here, too.
Okay.
He was just asking if I could find him a good forester.
Good luck. He goes, I'm going to do some hinge cutting on my piece. And, we had a property. I went and looked at it. We cut the ash out of it as the emerald ash borer was coming through, and, get it out before it was over. And he goes, I'm seeing a ton of deer, but it's not like in my food plots. It's where we cut timber. I said, because we're creating habitat. Now you have a bedding area in amongst, your mix of forest and ag land. You're getting some browse. You're really mixing things up a bit. And then he had a beautiful pole stand, which it was a failed ag field, probably like a 40-year-old stand, and he was doing the hinge cutting, and luckily he only went at it for like an hour or two, and he's like, I gotta talk to Kenny. And I go, what the hell are you doing? You cut tulip poplar and oak and maple, and you're hinge cutting. I'm like, those are your trees for the future.
Yeah.
And so we went through it, and I'm like, hey, just cut these birch out, because you're going to be giving, get these birch, the striped maple, even some crappy red maple, like cut them, put them on the ground, and give those tulip poplar, those oak, cherry, give them room to grow, you know. So that's my mix with hinge cutting is, maybe in those pole type stands, it wouldn't be bad if you don't have a bedding area nearby to hold deer. That's when it would be worth it. But it's like, if we were up here in our neck of the woods, no, you're not doing much. You're better off picking the undesirable timber species and cutting them, putting them to the ground.
Gotcha.
Yep.
All right. Another funny question, or actually it's a statement. Do you know Sean Fuchs? I don't know if you ever met him. I think you did.
I did meet him.
Yeah. So, I think you did, but he's a buddy of mine. He says, I don't know if it's directed towards you or me.
Right.
We know what kind of hardwood you're into. So, great, intelligent statement.
I like
there,
that.
Sean. All right. Couple more I wanna hit on here. There's a bunch of questions, but just for this, I think will be really helpful. When do you expect the hemlock blight to affect PA?
Well, it's already in southern PA.
Okay.
So the hemlock woolly adelgid, and it is killing the hemlock trees, which is a major concern of biodiversity for wildlife. One of the biggest in my eyes as a big fisherman, stream health, putting the shade on those mountain streams. But it's here, it's coming. But what is going to keep it at bay is cold ass winters. So I remember it was the winners of 13, 14, and 15 were god awful. If anyone can think back, and it was my last year at Penn State and then my first winter working, and I said, why did I get into forestry? I should have been an accountant because it was so freaking cold. But that gave us a couple more years of keeping the adelgid at bay, because those those super cold winters will suppress it, kill it and slow it down. But this winter was okay for cold. Like, we need weeks on end of that sub-zero stuff. We got a few days of it, but it's going to be here before we know it. We'll probably start seeing it on the plateau within, I'll be optimistic and say a decade rather than 5 years.
Okay. That's
sucks.
Scary. Yeah,
it is. It is.
Thanks for bringing us down.
Yeah, I got a lot more of that.
No. Yeah, this is another one. Might as well stay on that topic. Gypsy moth.
Gypsy moths. So
we talked about this in the last year on it, but
Yep.
what's the update with the gypsy moths?
Bad. I mean, there's going to be some acres in Pennsylvania that are going to go into salvage mode, where if anyone has time, drive Interstate 80 from Clearfield to Williamsport exits, and you're going to be like, wow, is it 4th of July or is it November 5th? Because there is not a leaf left on the tree. So it's really bad in spots. I mean, a lot of folks were very, very proactive. Our small company, we sprayed over 40,000 acres of privately owned land. So landowners are really taking the initiative to, keep their forests healthy. So we sprayed over 40,000 acres. The Game Commission sprayed over 60,000 acres. The DCNR sprayed, don't quote me on it, but I believe they were close to 250,000 acres that they sprayed. So, and you can evidently see the stands, and there's one, around Bellefonte. They're around the Bellefonte exit where it's like the whole hillside is wiped out and dead, and then all of a sudden it's like, whew, now it looks like it's supposed to, and that's one of the game lands that they sprayed, and it's unbelievable. But yeah, I mean, be prepared in some of your traditional oak stands that you may not be hunting an acorn crop, and if they were hit bad 2 years in a row, be prepared that it could turn into a clear cut. But hopefully, everyone will use all the tools in the tool belt to get it to regenerate, and then it's going to, turn into the next forest and be in good shape.
Okay. Yeah, that's what I was wondering. I've actually got quite a few questions on that, just asking, in my area, am I seeing that, and just questions around it. So I'm glad you hit on that. Another thing that was asked, I think this is a really good question, and we talked about this at the scouting camp, was identifying different ages of timber cuts via aerial imagery.
Yes.
Which can be difficult.
It can be difficult.
But how do you look at aerial imagery and get an idea of cuts and how and ages of them?
You can look at, look at the aerial imagery, get on Spartan Forge, Google Earth, whatever everyone's using, and it's just looking lush and symmetrical. And then all of a sudden you see a break in it, and it just looks, an aerial, you can be like, wow, that just looks shorter. And what it is, it's a different shade of green. Be like, okay, well, that's a clear cut. And then, that will get you started. Like, okay, everything's symmetrical and lush in the same color. And then all of a sudden the color changes and it, the picture looks a little off. And be like, okay, that's a clear cut. So then you need to start looking at the spacing of it. And at the camp we talked about it as a property I managed, where we had a clear cut, we had a mature stand, and then we had a shelterwood harvest where you could see those intermixing colors. And that's, like, put in layman's terms, that's probably the best way to go about it. And then the best thing in my eyes is boots on the ground. It's like, okay, find those spots. Hey, it looks like there was a harvest here. This changed up on, this update aerial imagery, and go there and look and start take those first couple stands and just pick them out on aerial imagery, and then be like, okay, I need to know what a clear cut looks like. And then you can be like, oh, all right, here's the clear cut. This is what it looks like on, your Spartan Forge or your Google Earth, and then go to the mature forest, and then it'll kind of train your eye of looking for those, different shades on the maps.
Yeah, I was just gonna, yeah, that's it. That's a good point. By confirming it in the
Yes.
field, and then you know what to look for when you're looking back. And I've found that summer imagery is actually better for clear cuts. Like I like leaf off imagery for most of my scouting, but if you're trying to like really learn ages of cuts and stuff, I feel like
you need to have that leaf color.
Yeah, the leaf color to be able to determine it. I feel like the stuff that's like really light, bright green a lot of times seems to be newer stuff. You know, 3-year-old. And some of it you can tell a lot that it was like full on clear cutted.
Right.
Like you can.
It just looks brown.
Yeah.
Like that image was probably taken like months after the harvest.
Yeah.
It was just dumb luck timing.
Yeah.
Of when when the
and the imagery date does make a big difference. So you got to pay attention to that depending on where it was taken in your area. Like, so it's not available for everything yet, but one of the layers within Spartan Forge where the UAV layer where you're able to scroll different dates.
Yeah.
You know, as they update more, that'll be available for more of the country, but mostly in more populated areas and around there, they have that. And you can go back and see how those cuts have progressed.
And I tell you, I've used it for work. I've had people call and say, hey, I'd like to look at getting a timber harvest done and blah, 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 Well, I cut timber and I can base off where they're located, what county they're in, what, general species composition. Well, I had my timber cut about 15 or 20 years ago. They just did a select. And I'd be like, all right, let's go scroll through some imagery and see what it looked. I was cut 5 years ago. And I'd be like, okay, yeah, that was that. Now it looks like this. Yeah, you got high graded, or the right thing was done here. And you can base a lot of like forestry history of like new clients and stuff off of these aerial imagery and time of year. It's pretty wild.
Yeah, I think that's a huge benefit, being able to look at the different years and be able to scroll through that.
Yeah,
I totally agree. But no, that was for most of the questions that we had there were based around those types of things. And there's actually one more that I want to bring up. It's a general question, but I think it's a good one. Is what is the most preferred food source for deer in the big woods?
White oak's one of the best, and we'll stick with like the acorns. They love acorns, but they're not here every year. They're not here year round. So it's like, hey, an acorn crop comes, every 3 years on average, 3 to 5 years. But when they're hitting the ground, they're getting sucked right up,
scooped right up.
Yeah, it's like a vacuum, But in the big woods, you got to focus on browse. You got to focus on, blackberry, raspberry, the hardwoods that we're trying to grow, oak, not cherry, oak, maple, tulip, poplar, ash. Those, browse is the biggest in the big woods because it's always there. It's going to be there. So that's what you got to hone in on.
Yeah, and I've said it before, like I like areas – like I like areas that have oaks if they have a bunch of other diversity involved. Right. But if it's like mature oak forest, I hate hunting those areas because it'll change the deer. Like when there's not an acorn crop, it'll change that deer pattern and movement. Like they'll actually like almost migrate.
Just disappear. You could be having multiple good bucks, a ton of doe one year, and you're like, oh man, I'm going to get back and hone in on that, monster 10 that I had on camera and be like, well, where'd it go? Well, it's gone, man.
Yeah.
So like if I hone in on an oak stand, there's gonna be a cut somewhere near. There's gonna be a timber harvest somewhere nearby.
Yeah, I'm right with you on that one.
Yeah, and 100%. And one of the other things is like acorn quality amongst oak species. We talked about this.
Okay, so white oak at the top.
Yes, white oak. Traditionally, and we're sticking with the hard up here. You could get into the south and get into the swamp white oak and, other mix up of species. But white oak, northern red oak, and then it's going to fall into your mixed oak, your black oak, your pin oak, scarlet oak, and then chestnut oak. Because if you take white oak lumber and chestnut oak lumber and you saw it out, same grade. You won't get the prime grade of it, but it goes into the same pile, kind of like with red oak and black oak. But it's not the same with acorns. So someone asked me this question once before: "Is hey, I got a chestnut oak acorns versus white oak acorns. It's like, you don't really see the deer eating the chestnut oak acorns. And it's kind of like there's a lot of chestnut oak in a white oak stand traditionally. They produce acorns more frequently than white oak, but it's kind of, you don't see them eating them because it's kind of like with us, it's like, all right, what are you going to have for dinner? If there's white oak acorns, chestnut oak acorns, all right, you can go anywhere you want to eat. You can go get a filet mignon or a Sheetz hot dog.
Yeah.
And chestnut oak is the Sheetz hot dog versus the white oak of the filet mignon.
Yeah. And it's funny because the guy that sent me this on Instagram, the question about, he's like, chestnut oak's preferred versus, this. He's like, or is that a Kenny question? I was like, well, let's refer to Kenny on this. And it was funny. And I'm not going to mention his name on here, but I talk to him all the time on Instagram, and he was like, and he's like, I said, well, Kenny said he referred to the chestnut oak as like a Sheetz hot dog. It's only if you absolutely have to. He's like, well, I work at Sheetz. He goes, I'll make sure I mention that at the next marketing meeting. And I was absolutely cracking up. So anybody that's not from Pennsylvania or the East Coast might not really know Sheetz.
Right.
But it's like your Wawa or your like whatever
Casey's or something.
Big gas station that has like food and stuff at it.
Yeah.
And I was cracking up.
That's freaking hilarious.
Yeah, we were dying talking about that one. So no, I think that was a good distinguishing factor there with the different oaks. So.
Yep.
Well, is there anything else you can think of, or we
covered a lot?
Yeah, we did cover a lot.
We covered a lot, but there's a lot of rabbit holes that could get jumped down with the deer and forestry and logging, and there's a lot.
We'll definitely do more, and we're going to do more videos too as we come along, and give your feedback. I mean, if you don't care about Kenny and his forestry stuff, tell me. I'll get rid of him. I don't care. I don't need. I don't need to have.
I can go
him
back
around.
to being an introvert.
Yes, you can. You say that you're an introvert on social media, but you're an extrovert in person.
Yeah,
so.
Exactly.
Yeah, because you just talk anybody's ear off.
I sure can.
No. Well, thank you, Kenny, for coming on again, man. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, Beau.
And anybody, I'll just go through his list and he can add to it. But generationsforestry.com, you can check out what Kenny's got going on over there in his business. Ken J. Kane on Instagram. Reach out to him there if you have any questions. Anywhere else you can think of?
No, those are my two main things. I mean, I guess I have Facebook, but it's there. No one uses that. I'm old, so I guess I can use Facebook.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you, man. I appreciate you coming
Thanks
on.
for having me, Beau.
Yeah. Thanks for everyone that submitted questions. If you ever have anything else you want to hear about, let me know. Shoot me an email, beau@eastmeetswesthunt.com. Send that in, and would love to hear from you. So thank you.
Thanks so much for listening to this episode of East Meets West Hunt with your host, Beau Martonik. For more great content and to stay up to date, visit eastmeetswesthunt.com, Facebook at East Meets West Outdoors, and Instagram at East Meets West Hunt. If you enjoyed today's episode, please review and subscribe, and we'll catch you next time.